Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
James Case, Senior Designer at Paizo and the project lead on Dark Archive.
And that's what we're going to talk about today, Dark Archive, the latest source book from Pathfinder Second Edition. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. So, yeah, let's get straight into it. What is the Dark Archive exactly?
Well, the Dark Archive is basically our book of all things paranormal. So this is our Gen Con release for this year. And where last year we had Secrets of Magic, and then we had Guns and Gears, which were all about magic and all about kind of steampunk and gunpowder and clockwork. This book is all about paranormal stuff. So mysteries, cryptids, strange powers, time not working properly. All those kinds of things are what you're going to find in this book. And then in universe, the Dark Archive was kind of this faction that existed in Pathfinder First Edition that was your bureau of investigating weird mysteries and that kind of thing. But it's not around in Second Edition. It was kind of, you might say, absorbed, you might say shut down. And so kind of the framing device we have here is, what if one person kind of, as the building was getting shut down and as all the clearance was being revoked, just kind of grabbed all these files and booked it out the door. So this book is kind of the 8 last case files of this lone archivist.
Is this the purpose of this book, kind of looking at a different perspective to horror? I think it looks like the Book of the Dead dealt with more like the adventure side of fighting the undead, and this is more like I don't want to say Call of Cthulhu, but almost like that almost like this unnamed horror going around.
Yeah. I think that because the book that I think this most resembles in a way is Occult Adventures from First Edition, which was a very occult and to an extent a little bit of a horror themed book. And there's definitely some DNA of that in Dark Archive, but at the same time, we've been pretty clear about, like, we want this to be about kind of the paranormal. There's a lot of occult stuff in this book. There's the Psychic, which is a full occult caster, that uses all kinds of weird mental magic. There's things like cryptids, there's a bunch of curses, but there's also some stuff that, like, maybe isn't so much in the occult thing. Like, we have a chapter, one of the case files is on cults, and cult in that very, like, kind of classical sense, drawing from this idea of what is an underground religion. So that's a more divine inspired book, or a more divine inspired chapter. Then we have something like the Deviant Abilities, which have, some occult magic, but also some arcane magic and also some primal stuff. And then you have things that are kind of outside of the framework altogether. If you could categorize everything neatly, it wouldn't really be too much of a mystery, right? So I think that this book is less of a maybe straight up horror book, although there's certainly some creepy stuff in it. The art of the mutant unicorn will haunt me for quite some time. It's very creepy. But there's also a lot of it's more about exploring the mystery and just, not knowing what's around every corner, not knowing, not being able to cast a divination and instantly know all information about a target and that kind of thing. So maybe occult as one part of the paranormal, but not the whole part.
So this book is almost like in 2 parts. The first 50 pages deal with 2 new classes that you can be, the Thaumaturge, I hope I'm saying that right, and the Psychic class.
Yeah.
And then the rest deal with the stolen case files, all the world building beyond that. So if I may ask you some questions about the classes a little bit.
Go for it.
The Thaumaturge, I've been asked, I think the number 1 question I've been asked about it is exactly, what is it? Is it another mage? And peeking into it a bit, it sounds like a bit of like John Constantine, maybe a little bit of the Black Knight from Marvel Comics. How would you describe this class?
This class started from that seed of occult detective, somebody who definitely in the vein of Constantine, definitely in the vein of maybe something like Harry Dresden, the web novel Pact is one that I like a lot, that there's some DNA of that in there. But it is about the kind of person who moves through the supernatural and can't just open gates with their mind, doesn't have divine power, but they have to kind of scrounge bits of it from a lot of different places. So the Thaumaturge is kind of your kind of mystic detective and like your frontline investigator into the paranormal. So the Thaumaturge's whole thing is that they are a frontline martial character. You know, they really do hit like a truck. Because they have the special ability to kind of, when they see an unknown creature, they can try to recall some bits of lore about it. And then if it has a weakness to anything, they can start to apply that weakness, even if maybe they're not using the right thing. So this could be anything from, you know, if they see if they identify this wolf as a werewolf, they're like, well, werewolves are weak to silver. And so they might rummage about in their pockets for a bit of silver or something that has kind of this like connotation to silver, and they apply that to their attacks. And now all of their attacks deal damage as if they were silver. But this can also be something a lot more abstract. This can be anything from maybe they're fighting an undead that doesn't have a whole lot of specific weaknesses. And they're like, well, undead are dead. So I'm going to bring out this like fresh flower because that's something very alive and has a lot of vitality. And then that's the thing they use to attack the undead's weakness. So it has a lot of hooks for story, and you can kind of bring this in. You know, I think Mark Seifter, who was my co-lead on this book and one of the cover authors and who wrote the Thaumaturge class, I think found a thread of people on the Paizo forums who were just kind of coming up with these like free association, like against this creature, what would I use? That's a lot of fun. They also have a number of mystic implements. So they have things like, you know, the one that are iconic Mios. They carry the lantern, and the lantern is all about seeing the unseen. You know, it allows you to kind of auto dispel, you know, some illusions and see the invisible and that kind of thing. But you might also go for something like, you know, like the bell. The bell is a mystic implement, and when you ring it, it disrupts enemies. So it's a lot of these kind of a less kind of hard magic that you see, you know, where if you cast fireball, a fireball is always like this, it does this damage, and more of these kind of softer, more kind of interpretive forms of magic that they use to basically track down and confront the unknown.
The psychic class. So when I first heard this, I started thinking like old school D&D version of how they did psychic rules from first and second edition. But when I took a peek at the book, I noticed that it's not like psychic in the sci-fi sense. It was more like psychic spells.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, is it just so from a rules mechanic sense, was it just a way to define the abilities for psychics, or is it because of the world flavor or the world building where you just wanted to this psychic is not maybe the same thing that I imagine it to be? How would you describe that exactly?
Well, going back to first edition, you know, back then in Occult Adventures where the psychic first came out, but I think even possibly before that, you know, when they started, you know, creating Golarion, I think the decision was made that psychic is a form of magic. It's a fundamental way that you cast magic. So it's not, I know that some other games have handled it that like, you know, magic and, you know, psychic powers or ESP abilities or psionic, you know, whatever, have been kind of, they work on different axes. So maybe if you have like magic resistance, that doesn't affect against psychic powers. But even back into first edition, psychic is always a way that you use a kind of magic. And it operates a little differently, but it's still at the end of the day magic. And so we knew that, you know, especially in the second edition of the game, we've been trying to tie a lot of the classes and even in the rulebook line a lot more tightly to the lore of Golarion. So I think, you know, we talked a little bit about how the psychic might feel a certain way, but it ultimately, I think, was always going to be a spellcaster in that sense. And that also gives us, you know, the Thaumaturge is a martial class. The psychic is a spellcaster. It's a nice combination. If I know some people play a lot of casters and not a lot of, you know, strikers and vice versa. but at the same time, I really like a lot of that kind of, more that like sci-fi, more. I think to me the thing that's cool about psychic powers in a lot of media is that they come from within you. They're not a thing that you necessarily find in a spell book so much. And so one of the things that the psychic does that so the psychic was the class that I designed of the two classes. And one of the things that I wanted to have was I wanted you to feel like you always had access to some psychic power. So they are a very, while they do have spell slots, they have fewer of them than a normal, like a bard or a wizard or a sorcerer would. But instead they get a lot of cantrips, which you can use just over and over and over in Pathfinder. And then they also get ways to amp up these cantrips using their focus powers. So it has that, I was trying to go for that kind of trope of, you're trying to like lift this boulder and you can't, and then you like really strain and then you can lift it. But it's not a different spell per se. It's, it's your same power, but you're just kind of putting more oomph into it. So the psychic has this very kind of like, a lot of their abilities are ones that they can use a lot, but they just have to figure out where they're kind of spending their power and how.
So the stolen case file. So I took a peek at this book about it, and I noticed that each section. So there's the cryptids, secret societies, deviant abilities, mirrors and imposters, cults, curses and pacts, temporal anomalies, which I personally love, and mindscapes, which I also love that too, just because of an old 80s movie, Dreamscape. I always wanted to see that in a role-playing game effectively, and I finally see it after all these years. So I'm very excited about that. But I noticed that in each section it's not just lore. It's very complicated section. There is an adventure for each section. There's also like adventure seeds also at the end. There are spells, but there's also pages dedicated to a spell with a huge, like a story around it.
Yeah.
If I may ask, what was the idea behind constructing these sections?
I think from the start, one of the words that we really found ourselves coming back to a lot was like eclectic and esoteric. So if, say, the whole book was full of cryptids, it wouldn't kind of have that, you would start to kind of figure out the rules of it, and then you wouldn't really be off guard quite so much. So we knew that we wanted to cover a very broad number of tropes. We went kind of back and forth on how many and what kind at certain times, and we came down with the 8 that we thought were 8 really classic paranormal things that were each a different flavor. So each one is a case file. So the approach was basically a case file starts with some lore to get you kind of familiar with this topic, and this lore is by the narrator of the book, that archivist KHW, who kind of grabbed all the case files and ran. So that's where you learn about the unknown, and then it has some options in the middle, which is anything from player options, maybe some spells, maybe some feats and archetypes, maybe a versatile heritage. It really can be anything. So that's the tools you get to play with the unknown. And then it concludes with a case file that's like a short, I think they're about 6 pages, a short, maybe 1 session mini adventure that just throws you in to experience the unknown yourself. So that was the kind of like, learn about it, get the tools to play as it, and then go off and experience it. And so that's kind of the pattern that all the case files take. And then the micro adventures can, if you're familiar or if anybody had played the playtest adventure Doomsday Dawn, that was our playtest adventure, and it basically hopped around Golarion in kind of time and space. It was a sort of grand tour. And this does something a little similar where you basically go around Golarion. There is maybe a cryptid that the cryptid adventure takes place at the Lake of Mist and Veils, whereas the deviant abilities adventure takes place in Arcadia, and the temporal anomaly adventure takes place in Tiansha. So we really wanted to get that kind of like eclectic, scattered, the paranormal is everywhere kind of feeling. And then between them are these little incident reports. These are just one page. They are about a trope that we didn't devote a full case file to, but would still be kind of cool. These were just open pitches. We let the authors kind of pitch some ideas, and we worked to figure out the one that would work best for the book. And we came up with some. I think the final. I think there's 12 of them. I really like them. I think they're a great selection of little one-page. Archivist Crane found this one weird guy hanging out here. Something was strange, but he definitely had some strange power. And so you read this report that's kind of being sent back to the archive by basically a field agent. And then at the end, there's like a little widget. It might be a feat, it might be a spell, it might be a cursed item. But it's just kind of a thing that you can use to kind of embody that instant report. And if you're a GM, you can run this as, you can use it as a seed for a home game or something like that. So we were just hoping to kind of get these little, there's more than 8 kinds of paranormal trope, and we didn't have space to do all of them. So we wanted to give these smaller case files throughout.
This will be out the end of July, right? At least the physical version. And
yeah, the street date is at the end of July. So should be out around then. And I look forward to everybody getting a chance to check out the paranormal.
Excellent. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this book. And for everyone out there, again, Dark Archive comes out at the end of this month, at the end of July. Thank you for everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.